What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today I will be building a gaming PC for around $617 Canadian or $485 US. This computer will be very good for streaming because it includes a 6-core processor and a 4GB graphics card, as well as 16GB of DDR4. This gaming PC will also have a great upgrade path for the future. Now with that being said, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now let's show you guys the parts. For the CPU, I decided to go with the Ryzen 5 2600X with a stock cooler for $140. I was able to snatch this up on Facebook Marketplace. This processor has 6 cores and 12 threads, has a base frequency of 3.6 GHz and a mass boost clock up to 4.2 GHz. And the chip is unlocked. But since I'm only using the stock cooler, I won't be overclocking at all. Even without overclocking, 6 cores and 12 threads should be more than good enough for video streaming at 1080p 60 FPS. If you could find one for around the same price as I did and it includes a stock cooler, I recommend you to pick it up right away. Or an alternative to this chip is the Ryzen 7 1700 or the 1700X, which you could probably also find around the same price as a Ryzen 5 2600. With the Ryzen 7, you will have 2 more cores and 4 more threads, but you should get around the same gaming performance. If you can't wait for your local deals, I will leave a link in the description for the Ryzen 7 and the Ryzen 5 from AliExpress. One downside to that website is that you will not get the stock cooler, and it might be $10 or $15 more expensive than your local market deals. Now for the motherboard, I decided to get this ASRock B450M Pro 4 motherboard from Facebook Marketplace for $60. This is a M-ATX motherboard, which is half of the size of an ATX motherboard. It has really good VRMs and it uses an 8-pin to power the CPU. This motherboard should be good enough for up to a Ryzen 5 5600X or even a Ryzen 7 5800X with the VRMs at reasonable temperatures. Now for the RAM, I got this kit for $70. It's clocked at 2400 MHz, but the 2 sticks are actually from different sets. And for that reason, I could only overclock the RAM up to 2666 with the voltage bump up to 1.35. In my opinion, in 2021, I think 16GB should be the minimum anyone should have in their computer. 8GB just doesn't cut it anymore for a lot of AAA titles. And from the look of it, the market pricing for 8GB RAM is only about $20 less than a 16GB kit. And one trick to get really cheap RAMs is to find the ones that's clocked at 2133 at CL14 to 15, because those are really slow speeds and people do not know you could overclock them, so they sell it for very cheap. From my experience, it is super easy to overclock a kit running at 2133 at CL14 to 3000 MHz running at CL16 or 18. Now for the boot drive, if you see my other videos, I always put at least 120GB SSD in my build. That's why I decided to go with this TechLast 120GB SSD that I got on AliExpress for $22. 120GB should be more than good enough to store your operating system as well as all the important programs. Of course, you also need a main storage device, which is why I decided to go with this 500GB hard drive that I got for $10 off Facebook Marketplace. You should always have at least 500GB as your main storage because all the games are really big now and you need the hard drive for more than just games. But if you have a little bit more budget, you could always get a 1TB hard drive for around $20 to $30 off Facebook Marketplace. Now for the power supply, I'm going to use the 600W EVGA 80 Plus bronze unit that I got for $50 off Facebook Marketplace. 600W is more than good enough to power today's system. Even with the graphics card we have today in the system, a 500W or 450W should be good enough. Now before you go into the comment section and tell me how you got really cheap power supplies for really cheap, keep in mind that I mostly use new power supplies because in my local area, the used power supply and the new power supply have like the same pricing. So I might as well just buy a new power supply. But I will have some builds with used power supplies soon, only because I scrapped those power supplies from the PCs I bought. Now for the most exciting part of the video, the graphics card. I was originally gonna use this GTX 780 that I got for $150, but for some reason, the GTX 700 series just wouldn't work with the Ryzen 2000 series CPUs. I tried searching it online and a lot of people had the same problem, so I just bought a GTX 970 from my friend for $200. That's the first time I've seen a GPU and CPU combo that does not work with each other. But because I swapped the cards out, the temperature inside the case will be a lot cooler since the GTX 780 runs really hot, especially with the stock reference cooler. Now for the Funko Pop of choice, I decided to go with the aeroplane Cuphead from the video game Cuphead. The only reason I picked this Funko Pop is because I wanted to, and that's literally it. I was able to snag this for $10 off Facebook Marketplace. Now for the case that's gonna hold all the components in, I went with the Cooler Master Masterbox Q300L. I got that for $55 off Amazon. I also decided to take the two ARGB fans from the Cooler Master MB320L case and put it in the front of this case so it gets some RGB. I will be using the MB320L for next week's video with blue LED fans that I had laying around, because next week's build is gonna be wizard themed. Now let's quickly show you guys the price tally for today's build and get to the time lapse, then the benchmarking section. Alright, now with everything out of the way, let's get to the benchmarks. First up, we have Cinebench R23. I got a multi-score of 7,682. You could definitely achieve Ryzen 7 1700 or 1700X level performance just by overclocking this chip. Up next, we have 3D Mark Firestrike. The results of GPU and CPU combined score was 9,792. That is actually a great score considering how much I pay for this PC. Now for the last synthetic benchmark, we have Unigine Heaven running at the basic preset at full screen. I got an average FPS of 200 and a score of 5,054. The first game I benchmarked was Rainbow Six Siege at the very high preset. I got an average of 144 FPS in the in-game benchmark. Up next, I tested Fortnite at medium-high settings. I got an average of 109 FPS. While benchmarking this game, the CPU utilization was only about 31%, which means you could definitely pair it up with more powerful graphics card in the future. The next game I tested was Valorant. At basically max settings, I got an average of 202 FPS. Yeah, I was doing really bad in Fortnite and in Valorant, so I'm not gonna show any of the gameplay. Anyways, up next we have CSGO at max settings. I got an average of 250 FPS in the in-game benchmarks. This is basically the performance you should expect with the Ryzen 5 2600 or 2600X, because I used to use one for my own personal rig and it got around the same FPS with the RX 5700, but CSGO is CPU bounded.
Don't turn around.
For the last game, I benchmarked GTA 5 at ultra settings and I got an average of 95 FPS in an in-game benchmark. GTA 5 is one of those games that doesn't require much to run, but it's just really interesting to see the different combination of hardwares benchmarking on it at different settings and getting more than 60 FPS. Now with all the benchmarks out of the way, let's get to the outro. Overall, today's PC build was not that bad for price to performance, but there was a problem with today's build that I have never seen before, which is how the 700 series cards does not work with AMD Ryzen 2000 CPUs. I tried looking it up online and people say just enable CMS, but sadly that did not work. But my friend came in clutch and sold me his GTX 970 for $200. I know it's not the best price for a 970, but considering today's GPU used market pricing, I think it's a passable deal. And another thing I didn't like about this build was the case. I don't know why I decided to give this case a second chance, since the first time when I used this case to build my friend a PC with a Ryzen 3 3100 in it and a GTX 970 in it, it was basically an oven. So what I'm saying is I really do not recommend you to get this case. But excluding those two caveats, I think today's build is really good and you should go outside and build yourself a PC like this. I will leave links in the description for all the parts I use except for the GPU. Now with that being said, if you liked today's video, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you didn't, leave. Don't press that dislike button, nobody likes you.